You know the funny thing about foundations? Everyone sees the grand house built on top, the manicured lawns, the stone facade that speaks of permanence and old money. No one ever thinks about the concrete and rebar buried deep in the earth, the cold, brutal engineering that holds it all up. My life has been about foundations. I build them for skyscrapers that pierce the New York skyline, for bridges that span impossible rivers. And I built one for my daughter, Eleanor. A foundation of love, security, and absolute, unwavering trust. Tonight, at my own 60th birthday party, on the sprawling green lawns of my Greenwich estate, I watched her grind that foundation to dust with a tiny white pill. The party was a parody of my life. 100 people I barely knew, laughing too loudly, their eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Men from the board, slick in their Zegna suits, shaking my hand while mentally calculating the company's Q4 earnings. Their wives dripping in jewels that could fund one of my construction projects for a month, air-kissing my cheek and murmuring empty pleasantries. It was a performance, and I was the guest of honor in a play I hadn't written. I stood by the French doors leading to the terrace, a glass of 82 Margaux in my hand. The wine was a ghost on my tongue, a memory of my late wife, Helen. It was the vintage from the year we met. I'd saved the last case for special occasions. My 60th felt less special and more like a finality. Then I saw them. Eleanor and her fiancé, Julian Thorne. My daughter. My sunshine. All grown up at 26, with a business degree from a college I paid for and an air of impatience I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, radiating the effortless confidence that only comes from never having known a day of true hardship. But tonight, there was a brittle tension in her smile, a flicker of something sharp and anxious in her eyes. And Julien. Julien. He was a masterpiece of genetic and social engineering. Wharton MBA, perfect teeth, a handshake that was both firm and disarmingly gentle. He came from a family with a famous last name and a bank account that had run dry 2 generations ago. He was ambitious. I've dealt with ambitious men my whole life. I can smell it on them, a mix of expensive cologne and quiet desperation. He worked for me, a rising star in my company, the son I never had. That was the story he sold, anyway. They moved toward me through the crowd, a golden couple parting the sea of lesser guests. Julian had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her, owning her. My hand tightened on the stem of my glass. "Dad, happy birthday," Eleanor said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. She hugged me, a brief, papery embrace that felt more like a formality than an act of love. "You're 60, Julian said with that winning smile. "You don't look a day over 59. He clapped me on the shoulder. "We're so proud of everything you've built. You have no idea what I built," I thought. We made small talk. The weather, the market, a new charity auction Julian was chairing. All of it was noise, a carefully constructed stage for the real play. I watched Eleanor's eyes dart to my wine glass, then to Julian, who gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. My heart, a tired old engine, gave a painful lurch. "This was it. Dad, you know," Eleanor began, her voice suddenly earnest, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "I was just talking to Mr. Abernathy from the board. He was saying how much he admires your vision, but he's worried you're working too hard." It was a clumsy, rehearsed line. Abernathy was a sycophant who wouldn't dare question my work ethic to my own daughter. While she spoke, her left hand came up, gesturing vaguely towards the garden. Her right hand, holding a small evening clutch, drifted over my wine glass. I saw it, a flash of white between her thumb and forefinger. A quick, practiced dip of her fingers. There was no sound, not even a faint plink, but I felt in my bones. A tremor that ran from the cold, damp soil beneath my estate, up through the soles of my Italian leather shoes, and settled like a block of ice in my chest. She pulled her hand away, her smile never wavering. "You just need to relax a little. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. My daughter, my Eleanor, my reason for every 16-hour day, every ruthless negotiation, every sleepless night spent staring at blueprints and balance sheets. She had just drugged me. For a split second, the world went silent. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. All I could see was her face, the face I had held in my hands the day she was born, now twisted into a mask of loving concern that was the ugliest thing I had ever witnessed. The father in me wanted to scream, to grab her, to shake her until the stranger looking out of her eyes disappeared and my little girl came back. But the father died in that instant, and the man who built an empire from nothing but grit and foresight took his place. My mind, which had felt slow and heavy all evening, suddenly became a diamond drill bit, sharp and precise. I saw the entire blueprint of their pathetic little scheme in a flash. The pill, my confusion, the concerned fiancé rushing to my side, the concerned daughter pleading with me to sign some papers, to cede control for my own good, before the old man did something rash. Julian's power of attorney. The board, swayed by his charisma and my sudden cognitive decline. The hostile takeover from within. It was elegant in its simplicity and breathtaking in its cruelty. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my age for obsolescence. That was their first mistake, a fatal one. I gave a weary sigh, playing the part they'd cast for me. You're right, sweetheart. I am tired. I looked at Julian. Maybe you're the one with the energy to steer this ship now. Triumph flared in his eyes, barely contained. He was a terrible poker player. I caught the eye of a passing waiter. Excuse me, son, I said, my voice firm but slightly slurred, as if the wine was already hitting me harder than usual. The young man stopped, startled. At the same time, I turned my body slightly, gesturing toward a table behind Eleanor where she had set down her own untouched glass of champagne. Eleanor, darling, could you grab me one of those canapes? My hands feel a bit unsteady. It was a symphony of misdirection. All eyes went to the waiter or the table I was pointing at. Eleanor, eager to play the dutiful daughter, turned her back for a single, critical second. In that second, my hand, steady as the steel beams I sink into bedrock, moved with an efficiency born of a lifetime of labor. It wasn't a tremble. It was a silent, fluid motion. My glass, with its lethal addition, was swapped for her flute of champagne. I picked up her flute and placed my glass right where it had been. No one saw. Not the golden boy fiancé. Not my treacherous daughter. Not the 100 pairs of oblivious eyes around us. She turned back, a small pastry in her hand. Here you go, Dad. She looked at the glass in my hand. For a moment, a flicker of confusion. A champagne flute? But then she saw her own wine glass sitting on the table, exactly where she'd left it. Her mind, already committed to the lie, corrected itself. Of course. I picked up my glass by mistake when he distracted me. I smiled, a tired, sad smile that was completely genuine. Thank you, sweetheart. I took the pastry from her. You know what? You're right. I should celebrate. I raised the champagne flute. To my wonderful daughter, and to the future of the company. In your very capable hands. Julian beamed, raising his own glass. Eleanor, her face a mask of relief and anticipation, picked up her glass of Bordeaux. My glass of Bordeaux. To the future, she echoed, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of the glass. She took a deep, confident sip. I watched the wine, my wife's favorite wine, disappear past her lips. The trap was sprung. The countdown had begun. 15 minutes. That's all the time she had left before she learned the first and most important rule of my world. Never, ever try to demolish a structure when the architect is still inside. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. To the outside world, I was the genial host, the patriarch slowly succumbing to the gentle tide of age and fine wine. I let go of Eleanor and Julian, letting them drift back into the orbit of their own importance. I needed distance. I needed a vantage point. I found George Finley near the bar, nursing scotch. George has been on my board for 20 years. He's a man made of beige flannel and predictable opinions. His only passion is his golf handicap. He was the perfect camouflage. Arthur, he boomed, his face ruddy. 60. The new 40, they say. Though my back tells me a different story, every time I try for the green on the seventh hole. I smiled, a carefully crafted expression of weary amusement. Tell me about it, George. My knees sound like a bag of rocks rolling downhill. He launched into a mind-numbing anecdote about his new driver. I nodded and murmured in all the right places. Incredible. You don't say. A titleist, really? But my eyes weren't on him. My senses were stretched thin, scanning the crowd. A predator tracking his prey across a crowded savanna. I saw them holding court by the grand piano. Julian was in his element, charming a small circle of investors, his hand always possessively on Eleanor. She was laughing, her head thrown back. From this distance, she was still my beautiful, perfect daughter, but I was looking for the cracks in the porcelain. The first sign was subtle. 5 minutes in, she was listening to Julian speak, and her head tilted just a degree too far, a slow, liquid movement, as if she were trying to pour the sound into her ear. She blinked slowly twice. Her smile remained, but it was no longer connected to her eyes. 10 minutes. George was now explaining the aerodynamic dimple pattern on his new golf balls. I was watching Eleanor take a sip from a waiter's tray. She missed her mouth by a fraction of an inch, a drop of water splashing on her chin. A tiny thing. No one else noticed. Julian, absorbed in his own monologue, was oblivious. But I saw it. The fine motor control was beginning to fray. The precise, elegant machine of her body was starting to misfire. 12 minutes. Her laughter, which had been a silver bell all evening, was now a half-beat too loud, a little too sharp. It drew a few glances. I saw Julian's smile tighten at the edges. He put a steadying hand on her arm, leaning in to whisper something. She swatted his hand away playfully, but with a clumsy force that almost knocked over a nearby floral arrangement. The first flicker of annoyance crossed Julian's perfect face. He was losing control of his primary asset. And then at the 15-minute mark, it happened. One of the younger board members, a tech millionaire named Shun, was talking about a new software venture. Eleanor, who usually only offered polite nods in these conversations, suddenly interrupted him. Software, she said, her voice syrupy and loud, slurring the S. It's all just ones and zeros, like a heartbeat. On-off. Yes, no. She giggled, a strange, hollow sound that cut through the polite murmur of the party. The small circle around them fell silent. Shin stared at her, confused. Julian grabbed her arm, a little firmer this time. Eleanor, honey, I think the champagne is going to your head. His voice was light, but I could see the panic starting to bloom in his eyes like a toxic flower. Not the champagne, she said, pulling her arm free and looking around the room with wide, unfocused eyes. It's the clarity. She looked at Julian, her expression one of profound, drug-induced sincerity. You gave me the clarity, Julian. You said it was important. The air crackled. George Finley's golf story died in his throat. Every head within earshot turned. You said we had to save the company. Eleanor continued, her voice rising. For Dad. Because he's a dinosaur. A big, sad dinosaur waiting for the meteor. She made a soft whistling sound and drew a line in the air with her finger, mimicking a falling object. Julian's face went white. He looked like a man who had just watched his winning lottery ticket burst into flames. Eleanor, you're not feeling well, he hissed, trying to steer her toward the exit. Let's get some fresh air. But she wouldn't move. She was anchored to the floor by the weight of her own chemically loosened tongue. She pointed a wavering finger at me across the room. Her eyes struggled to focus. We just needed him to sign, she announced to the silent, horrified audience. Just sign the papers. Julian said he wouldn't even remember. A kindness, really, for his own good. It was a confession. A messy, public, undeniable confession. The plan, their secret little poison pill, was now laid bare on the Persian rug for all to see. The whispers started, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Julian's carefully constructed world was collapsing in on him, and the sound it made was a beautiful, terrible silence. He finally got a firm grip on her and began to half-drag, half-carry her toward the doors. My apologies, everyone, he said through gritted teeth, his face a rictus of a smile. Eleanor's had a terrible week. So much stress with the wedding planning. She's completely exhausted. This was my cue. I pushed away from the bar, my face a mask of fatherly concern. I let a slight tremble enter my hands. I walked slowly toward them, my steps heavy like the dinosaur she had called me. I reached them just as Julian was fumbling with the door handle. I placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She was limp, mumbling about foundations and rebar. "Is she all right, son?" I asked Julian, my voice quiet and laced with worry. I made sure to use the word son. I wanted it to feel like a hot coal against his skin. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's fine, Arthur. Just overwrought. I'm taking her home." "Of course," I said, patting Eleanor's cheek gently. She didn't respond. "You do that. Take care of my daughter." He practically shoved her through the door and into the cool night air. The party was effectively over. The atmosphere was thick with scandal and speculation. People began to make their excuses, their eyes full of pity for the old man whose own daughter had just tried to ruin him. They saw a broken family, a corporate tragedy in the making. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see. I stood at the door for a long moment, watching Julian's car speed down the long, tree-lined driveway. Then I turned back to my remaining guests. "My apologies, everyone," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority that surprised them. "It seems my daughter is unwell. I think it's best we call a night. Thank you all for coming." They left quickly, in a flurry of hushed goodbyes. Within 20 minutes, the house was silent. The staff moved like ghosts, clearing glasses and plates. I told them to leave the rest for the morning. Soon, I was alone. I walked back to the small table where the swap had happened. Her wine glass, my wine glass, was still there, a small amount of deep red liquid remaining at the bottom. Beside it was the champagne flute I had been holding. 2 glasses, 2 paths, one taken, one not. The pain was a physical thing. It was a cold, heavy weight in my gut. This was my child, my blood, and she had conspired to strip me of everything I'd built, everything I intended to give her. The betrayal was absolute. But as I stood there in the echoing silence of my grand, empty home, the pain began to recede. It crystallized into something else. Something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. It was the same feeling I got when I stood on a windy, unfinished skyscraper floor, looking down at the city below, seeing not chaos, but a complex system of stress and support, of action and reaction. They had drawn a battle line. They had fired the first shot, using my own daughter as the weapon. They thought they were fighting a tired old man. They had no idea they had just declared war on the architect. And I always build to win. The sun rose over the Long Island Sound, painting the sky in soft watercolors of pink and gray. I was in my study, a room paneled in dark mahogany that had absorbed half a century of cigar smoke, whispered negotiations, and the silent weight of my thoughts. I hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury for men who weren't at war. In my hand was a heavy crystal tumbler containing 3 fingers of Macallan 25. The amber liquid was the only warmth in the room. On the desk in front of me, under the soft glow of a banker's lamp, was a single framed photograph. It was of Helen, my late wife, taken 27 years ago. She was standing in the half-finished shell of this very house, pregnant with Eleanor, her hand resting on her stomach, a smile on her face that could have powered a city. "I will always protect her, Helen," I had promised her in a sterile hospital room as she slipped away from me, her hand growing cold in mine. No matter what. The memory was a clean, sharp wound. No matter what. Did that promise cover this? Protecting her from herself? Protecting her from the man she loved, who was using her as a crowbar to pry open my life's work. The pain of the previous night had settled from a raging fire to a bed of cold, hard coals in my chest. The father in me was grieving. He saw a lost little girl, manipulated and misguided, desperate for the approval of a predator. He wanted to forgive. But the builder, the architect, the man who had clawed his way up from the dirt lots of Queens with nothing but calloused hands and an unbreakable will. He knew that forgiveness without consequence was just another word for surrender. And I do not surrender. My daughter was a pawn, a cherished, beloved pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. To save her, I had to destroy the player, moving her across the board. I had to dismantle Julian Thorne, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the hollow ambition that drove him. And then, I had to find a man pulling his strings. Because a snake like Julian never hunts alone. I picked up the phone. It was a heavy, old-fashioned rotary model that sat on my desk. I despised the flimsy, disposable nature of modern technology. I wanted to feel the weight of my decisions. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a decade, a number committed to memory. It was answered on the first ring. No greeting, just silence. "It's Arthur Blackwood," I said. The voice on the other end was raspy, laced with the accent of a man who had seen too many sun-scorched landscapes and too many back-alley deals. "Arthur, it has been a long time. I was beginning to think you'd gone soft, enjoying your gardens." "Isaac," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "I need a foundation checked. A deep one. I think it might be compromised." It was her old code. Isaac Heller had been a legend in Mossad, a ghost who specialized in corporate espionage before it was even a fashionable term. Now he ran the most discreet and ruthlessly efficient private intelligence firm in New York. We had a history. I'd built a silent, untraceable data haven for him inside a skyscraper in Dubai. He owed me. "Give me the name," he said, the sound of a pen scratching on paper in the background. "Julian Thorne. He's engaged to my daughter. Works for my company. I want everything. His financials, his communications, his associates, his debts. I want to know what brand of toothpaste he uses and why. I want to know who he talks to in his sleep." "This is personal," Isaac stated. It wasn't a question. "They made it personal," I replied. "Budget is not a concern. I want a full preliminary report on my desk by end of business today." "You'll have it by lunch," he said, and the line went dead. I hung up the phone and took a long, slow sip of the scotch. The first move had been made. Now came the theater. My phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Eleanor. My thumb hovered over the screen. "Date, so sorry. I don't know what happened last night. Julian said I must have had a bad reaction to my allergy medication mixed with the wine. I feel terrible. Can we please talk?" The lie was so perfectly crafted, so Julian. Plausible deniability. It positioned her as the victim, me as the overreacting father. It was clever, but not clever enough. I waited exactly 1 hour, the amount of time a genuinely hurt and confused father would need to compose himself. Then I called her. She answered immediately, her voice small and fragile. "Dad, Eleanor," I said, my voice heavy with rehearsed disappointment and fatigue. I'm worried about you. I'm so sorry." She began to cry, the tears sounding genuine. Perhaps they were. She was crying for getting caught, not for the act itself. "I ruined your birthday. I embarrassed you. I don't know what came over me." "It's all right, sweetheart," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "Your fiancé explained. A bad mix of medication. It happens." I let out a long sigh. Maybe Julian is right. Maybe I've been working too hard. Pushing myself, pushing you. All this stress, it's not good for anyone. There was a silence on the other end of the line, thick with her unspoken hope. "I need to think," I continued, letting my voice crack just a little. "I'd like to have a chat with Julian. Man to man. This afternoon. Just to clear the air." "Oh, Dad, yes." The relief in her voice was a physical blow. "He'll be so glad. He's been so worried about you. He respects you more than anyone." The only thing he respects is my bank account, I thought. 3 o'clock. "My office at the company headquarters," I said. "And Eleanor, you get some rest. We'll sort this all out." "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "I love you too," I said, and ended the call before the lie could choke me. I finished the scotch, the fire burning a clean path down my throat. The grieving father was gone now, locked away in a deep, soundproof room in my mind. The architect was in control. I was about to build Julian Thorne the most beautiful, intricate, and inescapable cage he had ever seen. And I was going to make him walk into it himself, whistling a happy tune. The Blackwood Construction headquarters occupies the top 10 floors of a glass and steel tower in Stanford that I built 25 years ago. My personal office is a corner suite on the 55th floor. It's a minimalist space, a large oak desk, 2 leather chairs, and a wall of windows that offers a panoramic view of the Connecticut coastline fading into the hazy silhouette of New York City. The view isn't for my enjoyment. It's a statement of power, a reminder to anyone sitting opposite me of just how far up they are and how long the fall would be. At precisely 2:58 p.m., my assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Maria, who has been with me for 30 years, buzzed me. "Mr. Thorne is here, Arthur. Send him in, Maria. And please, hold all my calls." The door opened, and Julian walked in. He was the picture of sober contrition. His suit was a somber charcoal gray, his tie a muted navy. He looked like a man attending a funeral. In a way, he was. He just didn't know it was his own. He approached the desk with a hesitant, respectful gait. "Arthur, thank you for seeing me." I didn't stand. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Julian, seat." He sat on the edge of the seat, his posture radiating a carefully calibrated mix of anxiety and deference. He had rehearsed this. I could almost hear the coaching session with Eleanor. Let him lead. Agree with everything. Show him you're on his side. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers, and just looked at him for a full minute. Silence is a weapon. In a room like this, it's a pressure cooker. I watched the sweat begin to bead on his upper lip. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, gravelly, the sound of a man who hadn't slept. "Last night was unfortunate." "Unfortunate doesn't even begin to cover it, sir." He jumped in, his voice dripping with synthetic remorse. "I am profoundly sorry for the scene Eleanor caused. There's no excuse. I should have been watching her more closely. That new medication her doctor prescribed, we had no idea it would react so badly with even a single glass of wine. It was a masterclass in deflection. It was the medication's fault. It was the doctor's fault. It was his fault for not being more vigilant. It was anyone's fault but Eleanor's, and by extension his." I let his words hang in the air, then waved a dismissive hand. The girl was overwrought. Let's not dwell on it. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. This was the moment, the delivery of the bait. But what she said, Julian, in her confusion, it struck a nerve. I sighed a long, weary sound. That I'm a dinosaur. That I'm holding the company back. "Artur? No. She didn't mean that," he protested, a little too quickly. She was rambling. It was nonsense. Was it? I cut him off, my voice sharp for the first time. He flinched. "Look at me, Julian. I'm 60 years old. This business, it's a young man's game now. Algorithms, derivatives, hostile acquisitions that happen in a nanosecond. I still use a rotary phone." Maybe she was just saying what everyone else on the board is too polite to say to my face. I let the idea settle in the room. I was offering him the one thing a man like him could never resist. His own ambition, gift-wrapped as my idea. His eyes, which had been full of cautious sympathy, now held a predatory gleam. He saw an opening. He thought the old lion was wounded, ready to retreat to his cave. "Sir," he began, his tone shifting subtly from apologetic to advisory. "With all due respect, you've built an empire. No one questions your legacy. But the market is changing. We need to be more aggressive, more agile. We need to take bigger risks to reap bigger rewards." Risks, I repeated, tasting the word. I built this company by minimizing risk, by checking foundations twice and pouring concrete once. "And that's why the company is stable," he said smoothly. "But stability doesn't excite Wall Street. It doesn't attract the kind of capital we need to expand, to truly dominate the market." He was on a roll now, reciting the gospel of every hungry MBA who thinks a spreadsheet is a substitute for wisdom. I stood up and walked to the window, my back to him. I looked down at the city I had helped build. Helen, my wife, she always said my biggest flaw was that I couldn't let go. I said, my voice quiet, reflective. Maybe she was right. Last night, watching Eleanor, I realized I'm not just fighting the market anymore. I'm fighting my own family. And I'm too tired for that fight, Julian. I turned back to face him. His expression was one of rapt attention, like a wolf watching a wounded deer. "You and Eleanor, you're the future," I said. "Perhaps it's time I step back. Not out, not yet, but back." His mask of concern was perfect, but his eyes were blazing. He was practically salivating. Arthur, you don't have to do that. I don't have to, I agreed. I want to. I'm thinking of creating a new position. Chief Operating Officer. Someone to handle the day-to-day, to spearhead our new expansion efforts. Someone with the energy and the vision I seem to be lacking lately. He was speechless. He hadn't expected it to be this easy. He thought his little stunt with the pill would lead to weeks of arguments, lawyers, and emotional blackmail. He never imagined I would just hand him the keys. I don't know what to say, sir, he stammered. Don't say anything yet, I said, walking back to my desk. It's just an idea, but if I were to do it, I would need to know that the person in that chair was 100% loyal to the company and to the family. I am, Arthur. Absolutely, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. Eleanor and this company are my life. I would do anything to protect them. Anything except be honest, I thought. Just then, my private email pinged. A single notification on my monitor. The screen was angled so he couldn't see it, but I could. The subject line was one word. Foundation. It was from Isaac. The preliminary report was in. I smiled at Julian, a warm, paternal smile that didn't reach my eyes. Good. I'm glad to hear it. Let me think on this for a day or two. In the meantime, this stays between us. Of course, sir. Not a word. He stood up, practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. He shook my hand, his grip firm and triumphant. He was no longer the penitent son-in-law. He was the heir apparent. As he walked to the door, I said one last thing. Oh, and Julian? He turned, his hand on the doorknob. Take care of my daughter, I said. She's the most valuable asset we have. He smiled, a wide, predatory grin. Always, Arthur. Always. The door clicked shut behind him. I was alone again. The smile vanished from my face. I turned to my computer and clicked open the email from Isaac. It was a simple, encrypted file. I entered the password, Helen's birthday, and the document opened. It was a web of deceit more complex than I could have imagined. Lines of text and arrows connected shell corporations, offshore accounts, and names I didn't recognize. But two names stood out, circled in red. Julian Thorne and Marcus Vance. My breath caught in my throat. Marcus Vance, the vulture of Wall Street. A corporate raider so ruthless he was rumored to drink the tears of bankrupt CEOs for breakfast. He didn't invest in companies. He dismembered them, selling off the profitable parts for scrap and leaving a hollowed-out carcass behind. The diagram on my screen was a blueprint for a murder. My company was the target. Julian wasn't just an ambitious fool trying to seize control. He was the inside man, the saboteur planting charges at the base of the foundation while his partner, Vance, waited outside with the detonator. And at the bottom of the report, a single, chilling paragraph. Phase 2 contingency. If Blackwood proves uncooperative, Subject Thorne has a medical contact, Dr. Alastair Finch, a geriatric psychiatrist. Finch is on Vance's payroll. Plan is to orchestrate a public event, document Blackwood's confusion and paranoia, and secure a court order for psychiatric evaluation. Goal: to have him declared mentally incompetent. The pill in the wine glass. It wasn't just for signing papers. It was a dress rehearsal. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning under my weight. The cold fury I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a crystalline, chilling calm. The calm that comes when the full scope of the battlefield is finally revealed. They hadn't just come to take my company. They had a plan to erase me completely, to strip me of my name, my mind, my legacy. They thought they were building a trap for a dinosaur. I was about to show them what it feels like to be hunted by one. There are two ways to build a trap. The first is a simple hole in the ground covered with leaves. It's effective for catching the witless and the unwary. The second is a load-bearing wall. You convince your enemy it's the strongest support in the structure. You encourage him to put more and more weight on it, to build his own ambitions on top of it, until the moment you kick out the pin and the entire edifice of his world comes crashing down on his head. I don't dig holes. I build collapses. The morning after my meeting with Julian, I convened a different kind of meeting. It wasn't in a boardroom. It was at a dusty, members-only boxing gym in Brooklyn at 6 a.m. My guests were Leo Horowitz and Sam Chun, the two founding partners of my legal firm. They were both in their 70s, sharp as shards of glass, and had handled every contract and ugly negotiation for Blackwood Construction since it was just me, a pickup truck, and a toolbox. They understood that the most dangerous clauses in any contract are the ones that look like gifts. We sat on a worn leather bench, the air thick with the smell of sweat and leather. I didn't tell them about Eleanor. That was family business, a wound I would tend to in private. I told them only what they needed to know. "We have a hostile takeover attempt in motion," I said, my voice low. "An inside man working with a raider. Marcus Vance." Leo, a small man with the eyes of a hawk, whistled softly. "The vulture. I thought he was circling bigger prey these days." "He thinks we're bigger than we look," I said. "And our inside man is convincing him we're ripe for the plucking." "The inside man," Sam said, a statement, not a question. "It's the fiancé, Thorne." I nodded. It didn't need details. They saw the whole ugly picture. They think I'm on the verge of retirement. They're going to use our own capital to leverage a buyout, then strip the assets. But first, they need to get control. Thorne is their key. "So we cut him out," Leo said, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee cup. "Expose him. Ruin him." "No," I said, shaking my head. "A snake cut in half still thrashes. And this one has a partner who can bite. We don't just want to expose him. We want to let him lead Vance into a cage of his own making." I laid out the plan. I called it Project Athena. For the next 2 hours, we sketched out the architecture of the trap. Project Athena would be a new subsidiary of Blackwood Construction, a legally distinct entity. Its stated mission: to build a revolutionary multi-billion-dollar smart city in the Texas Hill Country. It was the kind of high-tech, high-risk, high-reward venture that would be irresistible to a gambler like Julian. We would fund it generously, an initial seed of $200 million. I would publicly hand the reins of this entire subsidiary to Julian, his first and only command. But the subsidiary's bylaws, drafted by Leo and Sam, would be a labyrinth of legal razor wire. Every contract with suppliers and subcontractors would contain brutal, ironclad penalty clauses for missed deadlines. Every financial transaction over a certain amount would require sign-offs that seemed like formalities but were actually legal tripwires. And most importantly, the entire project would be structured as a special-purpose vehicle, legally insulated from the parent company. If Athena failed, it would fail alone. Blackwood Construction wouldn't lose a dime beyond the initial seed money. It was an airlock. "He'll bring in Vance's shell companies as suppliers," Sam mused, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "He'll overpay them for services, bleeding Athena dry and funneling the cash to Vance to fund the eventual takeover." "Exactly," I said, "and we'll let him. I want him to sign contracts with every Phantom company Vance owns. I want him to feel like he's robbing the place blind. And with every signature, he'll be wrapping another chain around his own ankles." By the time the sun was fully up, the blueprints for Julian's demise were complete. That afternoon, another report from Isaac landed in my inbox. This one was more personal. It was the Thorne family's complete financial history. Though old money was a myth. They were broke. Worse than broke. Their ancestral estate in the Hamptons was mortgaged to a consortium of private lenders known for their aggressive collection methods. Julian wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. His entire life, his engagement to my daughter, his charm, it was all a frantic performance to outrun the debt that was about to swallow his family whole. And then I saw it, the final piece of the puzzle. Over the past 6 months, a series of anonymous wire transfers have been made to these lenders, keeping them at bay. The transfers originated from a holding company in the Cayman Islands. A holding company owned by Marcus Vance. Vance didn't just have Julian as a partner. He owned him. My daughter's fiancé was nothing more than collateral. The next day, I called an emergency meeting of the board. I looked the part of the weary patriarch. I wore an old suit, not my usual impeccably tailored one. I let my shoulders slump. I spoke slowly, my voice tinged with a sadness that was not entirely feigned. I told them that the incident at my party had been a wake-up call. I told them I was tired of standing in the way of progress. I praised Julian's fire and vision, painting him as the modern savior the company needed. Then, I unveiled Project Athena, I presented it as my final legacy, a bold leap into the future. And I stunned the room by announcing that I was creating a new position, CEO of the Athena subsidiary, and I was giving it, along with full operational control of the project, to Julian Thorne. The room was silent, then erupted in applause. It was a shocking, audacious move. The board saw it as a brilliant piece of succession planning. Julian, who sat beside me at the table, was masterful. He feigned humility. He spoke of the weight of the responsibility. He promised not to let me down. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had just been handed the keys to the treasury. He took the bait, the whole hook. That night, I sat in my study, the house silent around me. I didn't need Isaac to tell me what was happening. I could picture the phone call as if I were in the room. Julian, breathless with victory, calling his master, Marcus Vance. He bought it. The old fool bought it all. He gave me a $200 million toy to play with. We can bleed it dry in 6 months. I could imagine Vance's cold, reptilian voice on the other end. Good. Don't get arrogant. Use our suppliers. Start with the infrastructure contracts. And remember the plan. This isn't about the $200 million. It's a down payment on the $2 billion the parent company is worth. They were celebrating, congratulating themselves on their genius. They had no idea that they weren't holding the keys to the treasury. They were holding a map I had drawn for them, a map where every road led to a dead end, and every treasure was a trap. I had laid the breadcrumbs. Now all I had to do was wait for them to follow the trail into the dark woods. A month passed. To the outside world, I had begun a graceful fade into obscurity. I was seen less at the office and more at the Greenwich Country Club, playing rounds of golf with the same beige men I used to dominate in the boardroom. I let them win. It made them feel powerful, and it made me look weak. I took up an interest in cultivating rare orchids in the greenhouse Helen had loved. I was performing the role of a man winding down, making peace with his own irrelevance. Meanwhile, Julian Thorne was a supernova. He took over the entire 54th floor, one below mine, for the Athena project headquarters. He had it gutted and redesigned in a stark, minimalist style of glass and chrome that looked like it belonged in Silicon Valley, not a Connecticut construction firm. He was the subject of a fawning profile in Forbes, titled The New Architect. Julian Thorne reinvents an empire. He gave interviews, speaking of disruptive innovation and paradigm shifts, using a lexicon of buzzwords he'd learned at Wharton. He was a spectacular success, a visionary. And every single day, at 5 p.m., a report landed in my private inbox. It was a summary of his activities, compiled by a quiet, unassuming woman in the accounting department who had been with me since the beginning and whose loyalty was absolute. The reports read like a thief's diary. Week 1. Julian signed an exclusive contract for geological surveying with Terra Prime Analytics, a company registered to a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware. Terra Prime's invoice was 4 times the market rate. The company was, of course, owned by Marcus Vance. Week 2. He approved a massive, upfront purchase of structural steel from Titan Alloy Imports. The price was exorbitant. The delivery date was a vague within the next fiscal year. Titan Alloy Imports was another Vance shell, with no inventory and no warehouse. Week 3, he hired a consulting firm, Strategic Horizons Group, for a $10 million retainer to assess market viability. The firm consisted of 2 partners, both of whom were recently fired executives from one of Vance's failed companies. He was a child in a candy store, grabbing everything he could, stuffing his pockets, unaware that the doors were locked and the candy was poisoned. He was so blinded by his own perceived brilliance, so sure of my senility, that he never bothered to read the fine print. He never asked why the contracts, drafted by my old friend Leo Horowitz, contained such unusually specific clauses about third-party audits and personal liability for the CEO of the subsidiary in cases of gross negligence. He saw them as boilerplate, the tedious work of old lawyers. He just signed, his pen stroke a flourish of arrogance. My only direct contact with him was through Eleanor. She was radiant, glowing with a vicarious victory. One Sunday, she insisted on having brunch with me at the house. She and Julian arrived in his new Porsche, a car his new salary couldn't possibly afford. The meal was a tense, brittle affair. Eleanor chattered endlessly about their plans. The wedding would be in Nantucket. They were looking at a house in Darien. And Julian was a genius. "Dad, you should hear the ideas he has for Athena," she said, her eyes shining. "It's not just a city, it's a living ecosystem. He's completely revolutionizing the way we think about urban planning." I just nodded, sipping my coffee, watching the man who was systematically robbing me put his arm around my daughter. I saw the way he looked at her, not with love, but with the pride of ownership, as one might admire a valuable painting they had successfully stolen. "Success is a heavy burden, Eleanor," I said quietly, looking directly at her. "Make sure the man you're with has the character to carry it honestly." A flicker of defensiveness crossed her face. "Julian is the most honorable man I've ever met," she said, her tone sharp. "He's doing all of this for us, for our future." Julian placed a calming hand on her arm. "What your father means, darling, is that it's a great responsibility, and he's right to be cautious. I appreciate your guidance, Arthur. I truly do." He was patronizing me, soothing the doddering old man while reassuring his prize. The visit was an agony, but a necessary one. I had to see for myself. I had to see if there was any flicker of the girl I raised left in her eyes. I saw none. She was gone, subsumed by his ambition. And in that moment, any lingering hesitation I had, any fatherly instinct to soften the blow, evaporated. To save her, I had to completely and utterly annihilate the world she now inhabited. The final piece of the trap was political. I arranged an accidental run-in with George Findlay, my beige board member at the Yale Club. We shared a scotch in the library. "Arthur, I have to admit, I was skeptical," he confided, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Handing that boy Thorne the keys to a project that size, it was a risk. But my God, the buzz he's generating is incredible. Our stock is up 12%. Youth needs room to run, George," I said with a weary smile. "But," I added, leaning in slightly, "it also needs a firm hand on the reins, even when it doesn't think so. I'm an old man. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be. I'm counting on the board to provide that steady hand if the time comes." I said nothing more. I didn't need to. I had planted a seed of doubt. I had subtly framed myself as the wise, cautious patriarch and Julian as the brilliant but potentially reckless youth. I had reminded George where his true loyalty lay. When the storm came, he would remember this conversation. The end of the month arrived, the day I had been waiting for. My quiet contact in accounting sent me the final file. It was the master contract, the big one. A $50 million logistics and infrastructure partnership with a massive, faceless conglomerate called Apex Global Solutions. It was Vance's primary holding company. This was the transaction designed to move the bulk of Athena's seed capital directly into Vance's war chest for the takeover. The contract was a work of art, a legal Mona Lisa of self-destruction. It was laced with interlocking penalty clauses, cross-default provisions, and performance bonds tied to impossible deadlines. Signing it was like willingly swallowing a tapeworm. I watched on a secure feed from my office as Julian signed the document in his gleaming chrome office downstairs. He used a thick, ostentatious fountain pen. He didn't even read the final page. He just scrawled his name, the new king signing a decree. He had done it. He had willingly pulled the giant, beautiful wooden horse inside the gates of his fortress. He and Vance and their army of lawyers and accountants were hiding inside, ready to emerge and conquer. They never thought to check what I had hidden inside the horse first. The contracts were signed. The funds were transferred. The chains were locked. The pin was in place. All I had to do now was pull it. I believe in precision. When a demolition crew takes down a building, they don't just swing a wrecking ball. They spend weeks studying the blueprints, placing charges at critical load-bearing points. The collapse itself, the dramatic part everyone watches, is just the final, inevitable result of careful, patient planning. The real work is done in the silence. The day after Julian signed the Apex Global contract, I initiated what I called the cascade. It wasn't a single action, but a series of perfectly timed, seemingly unrelated events, orchestrated from the quiet of my mahogany study. The first charge was fired by a small, independent auditing firm in Texas that no one had ever heard of. I had hired them 3 weeks prior. At 9:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, they filed a legally mandated report with the Texas State Comptroller's Office. The report detailed significant irregularities in the initial groundwork surveys for the Athena project. Specifically, it noted that the contractor of record, TerraPrime Analytics, had failed to file the necessary environmental impact statements. This was a violation of state law. It was a minor bureaucratic infraction, the kind of thing that usually resulted in a small fine and a slap on the wrist. But Leo Horowitz had woven a beautiful little clause into the TerraPrime contract. Any failure to comply with local, state, or federal regulations constituted a material breach of contract. At 9:15 a.m., my legal team sent a formal notice of breach to TerraPrime Analytics. The notice activated the penalty clause. Not only was the exorbitant fee for their services now null and void, but a penalty of 150% of the contract value was immediately due to Athena. Vance's shell company, which had been expecting a multi-million-dollar payout, was now on the hook for even more. The second charge was in logistics. The contract Julian had signed with Titan Alloy Imports for steel was predicated on a delivery schedule tied to the now-breached TerraPrime survey. At 10 a.m., our lawyers informed Titan that since the foundational work was indefinitely delayed due to regulatory breaches, their services were not required. According to the contract's force majeure clause, which Leo had cleverly drafted to be triggered by the actions of any other contractor on the project, Titan was now liable for the storage and insurance costs of all the steel they had allegedly procured. Since they had no steel and no warehouses, they were in breach of their ability to fulfill this new obligation. Another penalty clause was triggered. Another of Vance's pockets, instead of being filled, was now being ripped out. The third, and most brutal, charge was Apex Global Solutions. The $50 million master contract was the keystone of their entire scheme, and it contained a cross-default provision that was a legal work of art. The clause stipulated that if any other contractor on the Athena project was found to be in material breach, Apex Global would be required, within 24 hours, to post a performance bond equal to the full value of their own contract, $50 million, in an escrow account controlled by Blackwood Construction. At 11:30 a.m., a certified letter was delivered by courier to Marcus Vance's gleaming office on Park Avenue. It politely informed him that due to the regulatory failures of his other, smaller companies, he now had until noon the next day to deposit $50 million of his own money into my bank account. Failure to do so would put Apex in breach, triggering a new set of penalties so catastrophic they would effectively cripple his entire holding company. I didn't have to imagine the panic. I could feel it all the way from Stanford. Vance, the vulture, was being pecked to death by a flock of paper birds he had never seen coming. His plan to extract money from me had been reversed. He was now hemorrhaging cash, ensnared in a web of obligations he hadn't even known existed, all triggered by a minor paperwork error in an office in Austin. The phones on the 54th floor must have been melting. Julian Thorne, the visionary, the new architect, was suddenly buried under an avalanche of legal notices, breach notifications, and demands for payment he couldn't possibly understand. His $200 million kingdom had turned into a $200 million liability overnight. But the true genius of the cascade was not just financial. It was about narrative. At 1 p.m., an anonymous tip was leaked to a well-known financial blogger who specialized in corporate malfeasance. The tip suggested that Julian Thorne, the wunderkind CEO of the Athena project, was being investigated for awarding massive, no-bid contracts to a series of shell companies with ties to the corporate raider Marcus Vance. The blogger, smelling blood, published the story immediately. By 2 p.m., the story was everywhere. Reuters, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. The narrative shifted instantly. Julian Thorne was no longer a visionary. He was a fraud. A reckless amateur at best, a criminal conspirator at worst. Blackwood Construction stock, which had risen on the hype of the Athena project, began to plummet. It was exactly what Vance had wanted, but it was happening for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't falling because of a planned corporate raid. It was falling because of a massive scandal that implicated him directly. He couldn't buy the dip. That would be an admission of guilt. He was trapped. I watched the ticker on my screen, the red numbers dropping like blood. Every point it dropped was another nail in Vance's coffin. I let it fall for 2 hours, letting the panic on the market and in my own boardroom reach a fever pitch. Then, at 4 p.m., I made my move. I issued a press release. It was simple, concise, and devastating. It announced that Blackwood Construction had uncovered a coordinated and malicious effort by outside forces to defraud the company through its new subsidiary. It stated that I, Arthur Blackwood, was resuming immediate and full operational control of all company assets. It announced that Julian Thorne had been suspended, pending a full internal investigation. And it stated that the company would be pursuing all legal avenues to recover damages from the responsible parties, including but not limited to Marcus Vance and Apex Global Solutions. In a single statement, I had done 3 things. I had cut out the cancer. I had named the enemy, and I had positioned myself not as a victim, but as the strong, decisive leader cleaning house. The market reaction was immediate. The panic selling stopped. The stock stabilized. The message was clear. The old man was back at the helm. The ship was safe. I turned off the monitor. The silence in my office was absolute. The demolition was complete. The structure of their grand ambition had been reduced to a pile of rubble and lawsuits. Now, it was time to sift through the wreckage. I picked up the phone and buzzed Maria. "Maria," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Please convene an emergency meeting of the board for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want everyone there. Also, please extend a personal invitation to Mr. Marcus Vance. Tell him we need to discuss the terms of his transfer. And Maria, please ask my daughter and Mr. Thorne to join us as well. Tell them it's a family matter. The boardroom on the 55th floor is designed to intimidate. It is a long, narrow room dominated by a single, monolithic table of polished black mahogany that reflects the sky outside like a dark, still lake. The chairs are high-back black leather. The only color comes from the panoramic view of the coastline, a serene, indifferent backdrop to the human drama about to unfold. I sat at the head of the table, my rightful place. To my right were the members of my board, old men with faces of granite, their expressions grim and expectant. They smelled blood in the water. To my left, an empty chair, then Eleanor, then Julian. Eleanor was pale, her hands clenched in her lap. She kept glancing at Julian, a silent plea for reassurance. Julian, for his part, was attempting to project an aura of indignant confusion, the wrongly accused man, ready to clear his name. He was a terrible actor when he wasn't holding a winning hand. Across from them, alone, sat Marcus Vance. He was exactly as I had pictured him. He had the sleek, silvered look of a shark, all sharp angles and predatory stillness. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, as if this were an inconvenient delay in his day. He radiated an unearned confidence that I was about to systematically dismantle. The door clicked shut. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the building's climate control. I let the silence stretch, letting it press down on them. I looked at each person, one by one, my gaze lingering for a moment before moving on. Finally, I rested my eyes on my daughter. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice quiet, conversational, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "I've called this meeting because a line has been crossed, a foundational one. So today, we're going to have a talk about trust." I gestured to the massive screen that covered the far wall. It flickered to life, displaying the logo for the Athena project. "Project Athena," I said, "my supposed legacy, a bold new future for Blackwood Construction." It was also, as it turns out, a Trojan horse, designed to house an enemy army within our walls. Julian shifted in his seat. "Arthur, if this is about the stock fluctuations, I can assure you." "Be quiet, Julian," I said, my voice still soft, but with an edge of steel that cut him off mid-sentence. He flinched as if struck. You'll have your turn to speak. Or perhaps you won't. On the screen, the first slide appeared. A complex flowchart showing the relationship between Terra Prime Analytics, Titan Alloy Imports, and Apex Global. Lines connected them all to a single name, Marcus Vance. Invoices appeared side by side with market rate estimates, showing the grotesque overcharges. Bank statements showed the flow of money into offshore accounts. For the past month, I narrated, my voice a calm, steady metronome of condemnation. Mr. Thorne has been using his position as CEO of Athena to systematically award fraudulent contracts to a network of shell companies owned and controlled by Mr. Vance. The goal? To funnel $200 million of our company's capital into Mr. Vance's hands, in preparation for a hostile takeover. The board members murmured, their faces hardening. Vance watched the screen, his expression unreadable, a faint, contemptuous smile playing on his lips. He thought this was just about money. But simple theft is so uninspired, I continued. It lacks a certain personal touch. The screen changed. It now displayed an audio file. I believe this is a phone call that took place a little over a month ago between Mr. Thorne's new office and Mr. Vance's. I pressed a button. Julian's voice, brimming with triumphant glee, filled the silent room. Julian, audio, he bought it. The old fool bought it all. He handed me a $200 million war chest and called it his legacy. Vance, audio good. Don't get arrogant. Bleed it dry. Then we move on the parent company. Is the daughter still on side? Julian, audio completely. She'd believe me if I told her the sky was green. She's the key to the final phase, if the old man puts up a fight. I watched Eleanor. The color drained from her face. Her head whipped toward Julian, her eyes wide with a horrified, dawning comprehension. He refused to look at her, his gaze fixed on the mahogany table as if it held the secrets of a universe. The final phase, I said, letting the words hang in the air. I was curious about that. The last slide appeared on the screen. It was a dossier. A picture of a smirking, bearded man was at the top. Dr. Alistair Finch, geriatric psychiatrist. Below it were bullet points detailing their contingency plan, the orchestrated public events, the paid witnesses, the strategy to have me declared mentally incompetent, the court orders they had already drafted. This was the charge that hit the room like a physical blow. The board members looked utterly horrified. This wasn't business anymore. This was a patricidal conspiracy of the cruelest kind. And then I heard it, a small, broken sound from the seat next to me, a gasp that was half a sob. Eleanor was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were filled with a terrible, crystalline understanding. She was looking at the blueprint for the destruction of her own father, co-authored by the man she loved. She finally turned to look at Julian, and the love in her eyes had been replaced by a pure, undiluted horror. She slowly, deliberately, slid her chair 6 inches away from him. It was the loudest sound in the room. Julian finally broke. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. All the charisma, all the ambition, had bled out of him, leaving a hollow, pathetic shell. Vance, however, was still composed. He clapped his hands together softly, a slow, mocking applause. Impressive, he said, his voice a silken rasp. A truly impressive presentation, Arthur. You've been busy. So what is this? A public shaming before you call the SEC? I looked at him, and for the first time, I let him see the cold, hard predator that lived behind the mask of the tired old man. The SEC? I said, a humorless smile touching my lips. Marcus, you misunderstand the situation. The SEC is for public companies that break the rules. This is a private matter. This is a family matter. We have our own rules. I turned to my board. Gentlemen, you have seen the evidence. You've seen the depth of the betrayal. What would you have me do? George Findlay, his face the color of ash, spoke for all of them. Whatever you think is necessary, Arthur. We are with you. 100%. The jury had delivered its verdict. Now, it was time for the sentence. I folded my hands on the table and leaned forward, my gaze sweeping over the guilty parties. The law provides remedies for this sort of thing, I said calmly. jail time for fraud, financial penalties. But I find the law to be unsatisfying. It's impersonal. It doesn't teach the necessary lessons. I fix my eyes on Marcus Vance. You, Marcus, are a simple creature. You understand only profit and loss. Your plot has failed. Your network of shell companies is currently being sued into oblivion by my legal team. The $50 million performance bond is due in, I glanced at my watch, less than an hour. You won't pay it. That default will trigger covenants in your loans with every bank on Wall Street. By the end of the week, you will be insolvent. But that's not your real punishment. Get to the point, Blackwood, he hissed. The point, I said, is that I spent the last week buying your debt. Not your company's debt. Your personal debt. The mortgages on your penthouse and your Hamptons estate. The loans on your jet. Every marker you've ever signed. I own it all. You can't take my house, Marcus. Instead, I'm going to take yours. And your boat. And the shirt off your back. You will spend the rest of your life remembering that you were dismantled not by a market crash, but by one man you foolishly underestimated. His mask of arrogance finally shattered. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in the shark's eyes. Then, I turned to Julian. He was visibly trembling, his face slick with sweat. He wouldn't meet my gaze. And beside him, my daughter. She was weeping silently, the tears tracking mascara down her pale cheeks. She wasn't looking at Julian anymore. She was looking at me, her expression a ruin of shame, regret, and terror. This was the hardest part, the final judgment, the part that would echo for the rest of our lives. I took a deep breath. And now, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. We come to the matter of the family. My gaze fell on Julian. He flinched, a cornered animal waiting for the final blow. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to apologize, but I held up a hand and he fell silent. For you, Julian, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, there will be no lawyers, no courts, no public disgrace. That would be too noisy. It would involve the family name, and I will not have my wife's legacy or my daughter's future sullied by your pathetic filth. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. I slid it across the polished mahogany. It stopped directly in front of him. Inside that envelope, I said, are documents. They're the collected debts of the Thorne family. The mortgages on your ancestral home, the notes on your parents' failed businesses, every dime your family has owed for the last 30 years. I've spent the past 2 weeks buying them all up through a series of anonymous trusts. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. You came into my house and tried to take my company, my legacy, to save your family's name, I continued. Instead, you have delivered it to me. I now own your family's past, present, and future. I own the roof over your parents' heads. I own the ground their bones will one day be buried in. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Even Vance seemed to hold his breath. You will leave this room. You will go to your office, and you will pack a single box of your personal effects. My security team will escort you. Your company car has already been reclaimed. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. You will go home, and you will disappear from my daughter's life. You will not call her. You will not text her. You will not contact her in any way ever again. If I ever hear your name connected with hers, if you're ever seen within 100 miles of her, I will call in every single one of these debts. I will evict your parents. I will bankrupt your entire bloodline. I will erase the name Thorne from the ledgers of every respectable institution in this country. Am I clear? He could only nod, a single spastic jerk of his head. His face was the color of wet cement. I'm not sending you to prison, Julian, I said, my voice a final, chilling whisper. Prison is a cage of steel. I'm giving you a cage of shame. Every morning for the rest of your life, you will wake up knowing that your family's survival depends entirely on your obedience to me. You will live in a prison at my mercy. That is your sentence. I leaned back. Now, get out of my building. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, he stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, a jarring, ugly sound. He didn't look at Eleanor. He couldn't. He walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped, his confident stride gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated old man. The door opened and closed. He was gone, erased. The board members sat like statues. Vance was staring at me with a new expression, not fear, but a kind of horrified respect. Then there was only one person left to face. I turned my chair slightly to face my daughter. She was still weeping, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. The sight of her pain was a physical blow, a far deeper wound than any betrayal. "Eleanor," I said, my voice finally softening, the steel giving way to a father's grief. She looked up at me, her eyes a storm of devastation. "Dad, she stammered, her voice breaking. I didn't know. Didn't you?" I asked, not unkindly, but with a need for the truth. "Did you really think that giving your father a drug to confuse him was an act of love? Did you really believe that seizing control of his life's work was for his own good?" He said. "Julian said you were losing a step," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. "That the company would fail, that your legacy would be ruined. He said we were saving you from yourself. I wanted to make you proud. I wanted to be a part of it, not just the girl you protected." Her confession was the final, tragic piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just greed. It was a twisted, misguided desire for my approval, expertly manipulated by a sociopath. He had weaponized her love for me, against me. "You were always a part of it, Eleanor," I said, my voice thick with a sorrow that surprised me. "Everything I ever built, every beam I ever raised, was for you. You were never on the outside. You were the foundation." The weight of that truth seemed to crush her. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking, and wept for everything she had broken, for everything she had lost. I looked at the board members at Vance. "This meeting is over. The family needs privacy." They filed out silently, leaving us alone in the vast, quiet room. Vance was the last to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked back at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of surrender, a white flag from a defeated king. The door clicked shut. It was just the two of us, my daughter and I, adrift in a sea of mahogany and glass, surrounded by the wreckage of our family. I didn't know what to say. The architect in me had built the perfect trap, executed the perfect demolition. But the father in me now had to stand in the ruins and figure out if anything was salvageable. Could you rebuild a foundation once it had been shattered? I didn't know. All I knew was that the silence between us was heavier than any ton of steel, more vast than any canyon. And for the first time in a very long time, I had no blueprint for what came next. Chapter 10. Dawn After the Battle. Weeks have passed since that day in the boardroom. The autumn leaves in Greenwich have turned to fire and fallen, leaving the trees bare and skeletal against a slate-gray sky. The house is quiet, too quiet. The fallout in the business world was a contained storm. Marcus Vance vanished from the public eye. His company was acquired by a new holding firm, mine, for pennies on the dollar. The financial press called it a brilliant, ruthless counterattack by a titan of industry everyone thought was asleep. They spin tales of my genius, my foresight. They don't know the truth. They don't know it wasn't a business move. It was the roar of a father protecting his young. Julian Thorne ceased to exist. He is a ghost, living in the prison I built for him. His family is secure, their debts serviced by silent trust. They live on my charity, and he lives with that knowledge every day. It is a fate worse than any jail cell. The Athena project was dismantled. The money was recovered. The scandal was contained. My empire is safe. It is stronger, larger than before. I won. By every metric the world uses to measure success, I won an absolute victory. But I sit here now, in my mahogany study, a glass of scotch in my hand, and I feel no triumph. Victory is a hollow thing when the price is paid with the pieces of your own heart. Eleanor is gone. The day after the meeting, she packed a bag. She left a note on the hall table. It was written on a single sheet of plain paper, in the careful, looping cursive I had taught her as a child. It had only 2 words. "I am sorry." I haven't heard from her since. Sophia, my housekeeper, who loves Eleanor like her own, tells me she's staying with an old college friend in California, trying to find her way. trying to figure out who she is without my name, my money, or the influence of a man who reshaped her soul. I let her go. I know she needs the distance. She needs to stand on a foundation she builds for herself, even if it's unsteady at first. Perhaps one day, the road she is on will lead her back here. Perhaps not. Love, I've learned, cannot be engineered. It cannot be reinforced with steel and concrete. It has to be earned, and it has to be chosen freely. And I had, in my own way, taken that choice away from her for her entire life. Sometimes, late at night, the father in me screams in the silence of this house. He replays that moment at the party, sees her hand over the glass, and he wants to rewind time. He wants to knock the glass from my own hand, to drink the poison willingly, to play the fool, if it would have saved her from this heartbreak, if it would have saved us. But the architect knows the truth. A compromised foundation cannot be ignored. The rot had to be exposed. The structure had to be brought down to be saved. I did what I had to do. I destroyed my daughter's world to save her from it. It was my final, most terrible act of love. The sun is rising now, casting long, cold shadows across the lawn. A new day, another day of silence. I look at the photograph of Helen on my desk, her smile a ghost from a simpler time. I kept my promise, my love. I whispered to her. I protected our little girl, no matter the cost. The cost was everything. I take a sip of the scotch. The fire burns, but it offers no warmth. There is no blueprint for this. There's only the long, quiet work of waiting and hoping that someday you can build again upon the ruins.